about 3 years ago I reviewed a mostly freeware game series, A Game with a Kitty, and so far the only comment in it recommended me to check out another freeware icon, the oeuvre of Hedonistic, a name that I had not heard of before. Because that can be technically counted as this show's first viewer request, I shall oblige. Partially at least. Going through all about 20 games in his catalog will be too much of a workload in one video in my current situation, so I shall do a compromise and focus on his most well-known series, Fishhead, that has about 9 games. So, here's the UDAC rotation. Hopefully this was worth the wait.
Already we ran into a problem as some of the earliest games in the series are so archaic that they don't work on modern systems. These games being the first 3 platformers, so for those I had to use gameplay footage from this user. Doesn't look that I missed much though. Fishhead and the Evil High Hair from 1998 establishes that our titular hero is a victim of the shenanigans from the titular evil villain, though his evil is limited to petty theft. The adventure is a collection of janky one-room levels where you shoot literal potheads, that is kind of clever in a juvenile way, and you have to collect all the coins to get to the next one, and that's it. Graphics are adequate for someone who was probably very young when making this. The soundtrack consisting of classical music meanies can be grating, however. Fishhead and the Lost Crystal from 1999 is pretty much the same, with the soundtrack being replaced with Nintendo tracks and a new gameplay addition of vehicle segments. Whoa! Both of these games end abruptly without any resolution. The return of Fishhead from 2000 bloated its gameplay length to an hour, which is more than the previous games combined, and the formula got new additions with switches you have to press once in a while. Also seems that enemies are way more relentless this time around. From narrative perspective, it's the same spiel of chasing High Hair around the lands, though with the difference that he has added arson in his evil axe repertoire. And the game has an ending, though it's anticlimactic and probably broken. I mean, there had to be enemies in this final free drop segment at some point, right?
Supposedly there was going to be a remake of the first game for its 10th anniversary, but those plans never materialized. The first Fishhead game that I managed to record my own footage from is 1999's Fishhead card that... I don't get it. So let's then finally get to something that has more meat to its bones. Fishhead 2.
Released in 2002, the next chapter in the ventures of Aquatic Noggin got a big technical overhaul as levels are no longer bound by a single screen, and even soundtrack has a nicer selection of midis that, according to the credits, are all Neil Young, Nirvana and Jimi Hendrix songs, though my light music knowledge is too poor to name any of them. What comes to world building though, Fishhead himself is still as big of an enigma, other than being a general problem solver when the heat rises. This time it happens when Dr. Bao invents a machine that clones flowerpot heads, though I think he's not a bad guy, but loses its control to world-conquering hungry High Hair, who we learn gets evil only when he's drunk.
Truly a more effective way of keeping kids away from alcohol than any after-school special could hope to achieve. Thus, Fishhead begins his world-saving journey that lasts about 90 minutes, and now that this is the first of the platformers where I got to experience the gameplay myself, it certainly has its own technical quirks that makes moving cumbersome, but to be fair, those are some very common problems of the early 2000s freeware titles.
Let's first look at what new additions there are to Fishhead formula. Firstly, we have the franchise's first functioning boss battle that is simply simple, and throughout these games there are mostly a switch pressing variety. However, that's not the only one, because after High Hair's defeat, a brand new villain, Tomato Man, decides to use the machine for the same purposes, and he doesn't require alcohol to get nasty. As an interesting change, the previously infinite spewing gun has now limited ammo, so there's this nice new strategic element of choosing your targets carefully. But that's where my praises end. It is often difficult to determine how much force you need to apply to the jump button, and there's a bit of a slide like in Super Mario Bros. 3, and all of this is made worse by landmines that blend into grass terrain. Not to mention wonky environment collision boxes can cause unnecessary deaths.
Still, Fishhead 2 is overall okay for a product of its time. I mean, it's not Gunner 3 or anything, but can still be simulating if you really need a quick gaming fix. Now let's get on to what was, according to Mr. Van Riek's old website, his most popular game. Much to his charging, because he absolutely hates its guts. Sounds promising already. And that can work whenever you choose to interpret that as ironic or not. Here's from 2003, Fishhead 3.
This entry that is also known by its longer title Fishhead 3 The Search for a Heart of Gold cut its number of levels by 1/3 from the previous one to 16 in total, though overall length-wise there's barely any difference due to levels being longer and in few cases harder, but I'll get to those soon. Curious that the previous game could have had the same amount of levels, but the dev thought it wasn't enough and crammed in that Tomato Man extension to the plot. Speaking of Tomato Man, he and Highhair join forces to pester their common enemy by threatening to build a factory on Fishhead's lands. He asks from the wise sage Master Dre what should be done, and is advised to search for a heart of gold that I guess is supposed to help him in some way to deal with them. Did everyone forget that Fishhead owns a gun?
As you may have deduced from the soundtrack, the dev indeed uses his own music this time, and even he agrees it to be bad. The intro's guitar strumming is somewhat nice, but otherwise the tracks are repetitive and have instrument choices that are certainly choices, and this whole concoction makes the soundtrack structurally unbalanced. The gameplay hasn't taken as big of a nosedive, but it is a nosedive nonetheless.
The reason why levels are longer in this one is due to their more mage-like structure, where more emphasis is put on finding correct keys, and because it retains the previous game's control scheme, it feels more cumbersome. These are starting to be big enough levels that a middle checkpoint will be required to make dying less hair-pulling. Speaking of which, vehicle segments make a return with 4 in total, and they all share the same problem. The car is too fast for how close the camera is, which makes required reaction times way too unforgiving. The last of them is probably worse because it comes right before the game's only boss battle, and if you game over the battle, you have to do both all over again. There's not much else I can add, so to summarize, the creator doesn't have kind words to say about Fishhead 3, and I'm not that enthusiastic about it either. I guess the humor in cutscenes is slightly amusing.
The lingering dissatisfaction the developer felt towards this game probably contributed to him cancelling the next chapter in this saga, Fishhead World Tour, that has only about 10% of the game completed. Based on the only level available, it certainly looks different and has in theory interesting mechanic of switching between songs in order to attack enemies and probably later solve puzzles, but how it's executed here makes the pacing seem sluggish. Therefore, Hayo and Riek focus on other projects like the 2D platformer duology starring Hillbillies Bernard and Hank, and another less hectic 2D platformer duology Santa Man, who, must be addressed, is not Santa Claus, just some random dude who dresses like one. But in the midst of all of this, there was room for a Fishhead spin-off, Dungeon TV.
Dungeon TV is the special from 2006 and its 2007 sequel Dungeon TV Factory are a top-down puzzle game take on Fishhead's thinly built world, where he and his former enemy Highhair join forces to solve these small conundrums. Granted, it's more due to necessity, but glad to see Highhair's AA meetings have brought results. The premise is that Tomato Man has kidnapped them both to be on a deadly game show for his entertainment network, as one of the minions from Bernard and Hank games explains. No confirmation on if any Hayo and Riek developed games share a universe or not. The gameplay loop is to alternate between Fishhead and Highhair to solve each room by reaching switches that need to be pressed at the same time in order to get out, with the added caveat that Fishhead can only touch green tiles and Highhead red tiles. All this needs to be done under 2 minutes. And to be honest, it's not for me. First of all, these levels repeat themselves in their obstacle selection, and secondly, this whole switching mechanic makes the game slow-paced. Now that I think of it, this could be solved by changing this game into a 2-player co-op. The sequel that was made for a contest, which probably explains why there is no story to speak of, alters the formula by adding 1 extra minute to time limit and having you first get 2 statues back and then push them to a truck that clears the exit. Also, there are no Tomato Man clones running around. Basically, it has the same problems as its predecessor, though it's marginally better only because graphics are crisper and its only level music is low-key enough to not get on my nerves. Both can be completed in less than 30 minutes, the first one in less than 20, so in the grand scale of things, the quirks of Dungeon TV games don't matter that much.
That was the last time anyone heard of Fishhead for a while, and Hayawan Rick in general, because in 2010 he started an 8-year-long hiatus from video game development in order to focus on his history teaching career, though apparently he did work on his commercial debut in midst of vacations. The said commercial debut, Rowing in the Dark, a 2D cave exploration game, was released in 2018 along with some re-releases of his older catalog, which gave hope that Fishhead himself would see a return. And indeed, in 2020, after 13 years of being absent from video game hemisphere, came Fishhead Blueprint.
Placing this newest title in the continuity is difficult, because the game's advertising blurb states the events to pick up where Fishhead 2 ended, but in the game itself the gap is revealed to be 10 years, and it's unclear if Fishhead 3 happened in between, after, or if it has been stricken out of canon. Or which of the games are considered canon, as the blurb claims Blueprint to be the 4th game in the series, which begs the question which one of Fishhead's adventures before 2 actually happened. However, it seems that for 10 years there has been no major developments in anyone's lives, and one day Tomato Man without provocation decides to steal the blueprints for Dr. Pau's cloning machine so he can try the same thing as last time, expecting different results. Look, I'm aware these games are not known for their complex narratives, but come on!
Added to that, there's barely any dialogue, and even when there is, it's rudimentary. The series' trademark juvenile edgy humor is completely absent. And in a weird way, that works for this game's advantage.
To differentiate from the previous games that have garish assets and present a quaintly boyish world with its contrast of funny-looking, simply made characters who use guns and chainsaws, Blueprint rounds all of its predecessors' edges with consistent, calm-colored pixel art and soft-sounding chiptune soundtrack, and even in-universe-wise Fishhead has said farewell to arms and switches pistol to hammers. Oh, but enemies with chainsaws is still totally fine. My point is that in its atmosphere this game feels to be more of a dream. Kind of similar vibe to games with kitties, but whereas that franchise's dreamlikeness is mysterious and whimsical, this one is cozy and nostalgic. Blueprint is what Fishhead 2 feels to an adult who reminisces of playing it back in the elementary school days.
I guess this can be counted as a cozy game, though it is a bit of a borderline because of being more action-oriented than the games with that label tend to be. Whatever the case, narrative tepidness can be excused if good gameplay fills the void, and there has been improvements. For one, unlike in the previous games, physics won't screw you over if you jump too close to a wall.
Physics needed adjusting anyway because of new abilities Fishhead gets during his travels from Dr. Bao, like double jump and wall jump, and controls are responsive with all the maneuvers. Yes, even the vehicle segments to an extent. Though this time he rides with a goose, because... why not? Well, flying is a bit more chaotic, but at least players don't die just from one hit. Level design is more stellar with different environmental gimmicks, there is more variety in enemies, though the game has difficulties at delivering information on how to hurt them without getting hurt yourself in trying to figure that out, which is made worse with severe lack of invincibility frames leading to many unnecessary deaths. The same applies in a lesser scale to bosses, but once you figure out the way, or they stop bugging and actually do the maneuvers that reveal their weak spot, they fall down easily. At least the final boss was okay.
The regular final boss at least, because by completing bonus levels in all 4 worlds, you'll get an access to the secret 5th world. But I didn't bother with it because, those bonus levels flat out cheat. Fishhead Blueprint is not that distinct from the other indie platformers of the era, but on its own it's decently funny and entertaining, even for those who didn't grow up with the rest of the games.
What comes to Fishhead series as a whole, Blueprint is such a leap in polish and overall presentation that it leaves the rest of his adventures seem extremely lacking in comparison, even if that game's narrative hinges on players being familiar with the characters already. The earlier titles require to be found at a certain age if you want to get the most out of them. At those innocent childhood years when anything video game related seemed cool and your criteria for quality hadn't shaped into its final form yet. They are clearly relics of a bygone era with their kitschy audio visuals and janky gameplay, but even its worst iterations can bring some minuscule amounts of joy if you have nothing better to do.
So far there hasn't been any word from Hayo and Riek in regards to Fishhead's future or any other game for that matter, but whenever I'll try anything that comes next, if the gameplay stays as stellar as in this latest entry and there's more nuance in narrative elements, then sure. The franchise is 26 years already, about time we get some lore.